The pain just keeps getting worse. I can't sleep. What should I do?
All right, stay calm. When did the symptoms start exactly?
They found the 3 children and 4 grandchildren. I'm so sorry.
Why must it be this way? Forever grateful for your kindness.
He knew the number because he had counted, not obsessively, not in the way of the sniper whose count was a form of the conscience. Differently, in the way of a man who had simply kept track of what he had done, because the keeping track was one of the ways he understood his own work. He had treated hundreds of men over the 2 years and 3 months of his service. Of those, approximately 200 had survived injuries that, in a professional judgment, would have been fatal without his intervention. 200 men who were alive because he had been where he was when they were where they were. He did not count this as an achievement. He counted it as a fact. The achievement would have been saving one more. The one he could not save was a man named Thomas. I will use the name his family has permitted me to use, because the specific person deserves to be named, because the specific person is the point. Thomas was 22 years old and from Georgia, and had been in the same company as the medic since the landing at Salerno in September 1943. They had been together through the Italian campaign, through the Rapido River crossing in the Liri Valley, and the long grinding advance toward Rome. And in that time they had developed a specific friendship of 2 men who had been through enough together that the friendship is no longer a social construction, but a simple fact of what they are to each other. Thomas was hit on a Tuesday afternoon in January 1944, outside Casino, during a patrol that had gone wrong in the specific way that patrols in the Italian campaign went wrong. The contact with the German position, the fire from an unexpected angle, the specific infusion of the first seconds before the situation became clear. He was hit in the chest. The medic was there within 45 seconds. He had timed himself in the specific way of a professional who measures professional variables, and 45 seconds from the shot to the hands on the wound was as fast as the terrain and the fire allowed. It was not fast enough. The wound was specific in its character, the angle of the bullet, the specific damage to the specific structures, and the specific medical tools available to the medic in the field. In January 1944, outside Casino, in the middle of a patrol that had gone wrong, were not sufficient to address it. He did what he could. He knew, within 2 minutes of beginning, that what he could do was not going to be enough. Thomas died at 3:27 in the afternoon of a Tuesday in January 1944. The medic was holding him when he died. This is the story of the medic, of what the 200 meant and what the one meant, and of the specific way that the one, which could not be undone, lived alongside the 200, which also could not be undone, for the 53 years of his life after the war. Before I go further, I want to ask you directly, subscribe and share this episode if it's giving you something. The stories in this series are the specific human stories that the official histories don't tell. The stories of what the war cost the people who were in it, in the specific currencies of the specific lives. Subscribe and hit the like button. Back to him. Back to the one he couldn't save. The specific question that the journal asks, what more could I have done, is one that I want to examine directly, because I think it is one of the most important questions that the specific experience of the combat medic poses, and because the specific answer matters in ways that go beyond the specific case. The professional answer, as I have said, is nothing more. The specific wound, the specific tools, the specific time. The analysis produces the same conclusion across 53 years of asking. Nothing more could have been done in the specific conditions of the specific moment. The human answer is different. The human answer is, I don't know. The human answer is, there's always something that might have been different, some fraction of a second recovered, some technique slightly better applied, some decision made differently in the specific chaos of the specific 45 seconds. The human answer is a specific refusal to accept the professional answer as the end of the question. because a professional answer, however correct, does not address the specific grief of the specific person who was holding the specific man when the specific man died. Both answers are true. The professional answer is correct. The human answer is necessary. The specific person who accepts only the professional answer, who allows a clinical assessment to substitute for specific grief, is a person who has not fully acknowledged the weight of the specific loss. The specific person who accepts only the human answer, who allows a specific grief to substitute for the clinical assessment, is a person who has not been honest about what the specific conditions allowed. He held both for 53 years. This is not a comfortable position. The specific discomfort of holding the correct professional answer and the necessary human question in the same life for 53 years is a specific cost that the specific position exacted. He paid it. He practiced medicine. He asked the question. There is something specific about the way that the medics of the Second World War understood their own role that is worth noting, because it illuminates the specific character of the grief that the specific failures produced. The medic understood himself to be the person between the wound and the death, the specific individual who stood in the specific gap between the moment of the wounding and the moment of the dying, and whose specific actions in that gap determined the specific outcome. This understanding was accurate. The medic's actions in the gap did determine the outcome in many cases. The specific ones who survived because the medic was there and did the specific right thing, the 200, are the specific evidence of this. The understanding also produced the specific form of the grief. If the medic is the person between the wound and the death, then the death is the specific failure of the specific person. The professional knowledge says, not always, not when the wound is beyond the tools available. The human experience says, you were between the specific wound and the specific death, and you did not prevent the specific death. The two registers, the professional and the personal, do not speak to each other. They inhabit the same life. They do not resolve. He carried them for 53 years and practiced medicine for 41. His patients did not know. His daughter did not know until the journal. Thomas was 22 years old. The specific men who were alive because of the medic's presence in the gap, the 200, built their specific lives after the war. Some of them, over the years, found ways to tell him what his presence had meant. Not all. Most people who have been saved from death by a specific person in a specific moment do not go looking for the person afterward. The specific context of the battle and the specific chaos of the aftermath and the specific difficulty of finding the specific medic among all the specific people of the army made most of the connections impossible. The ones who made the connections were the ones for whom the specific connection mattered enough to pursue it. They wrote letters. They showed up at the reunion events that the units organized in the post-war years. They came to his office in Pennsylvania, having tracked him through the veterans' organizations, having found the address through the specific network of people who were looking for the specific person who had made the specific difference. He received these visits and these letters with the specific gratitude and the specific complicated feeling of a man who needed the evidence of the 200 and who also knew that the 200 did not change the one. The visits and the letters were real and they mattered. They did not address the specific weight of the specific journal. His daughter has a journal. She has read it in its entirety. The 53 years of the entries, the technical language of the clinical analysis applied to the specific question, the same question arriving at the same answer across the decades with the specific persistence of something that cannot be let go. She has also kept, in the same place where she keeps the journal, the specific letters that some of the 200 wrote. The letters are various in their character. Some are brief and factual, acknowledging the specific debt in the specific formal language that the specific cultural moment allowed. Some are longer and more personal, attempting the specific articulation of gratitude that the specific experience requires. All of them say in one form or another the specific thing. You were there, and because you were there, I am here. She keeps the journal and the letters together because they are both parts of the same accounting. The accounting of the medic who saved 200 men and spent 53 years asking what more he could have done for the one. The journal is one register of the accounting. The letters are the other. Neither register is complete without the other. Both are necessary. The specific lesson that his story teaches, the specific thing that the 53 years of the journal and the 41 years of the medicine and the specific quality of the attention together demonstrate, is one about the relationship between the weight of what cannot be changed and the life that continues alongside it. He could not change the outcome for Thomas. The professional knowledge told him this from the beginning. The human grief refused to accept it as the end of the question. He held both the knowledge and the grief in the same life for 53 years and practiced medicine in between them. This is not a lesson about the resolution of grief. The grief was not resolved. It is a lesson about the possible coexistence of the grief and the life, about the specific human capacity to carry the specific thing that cannot be fixed and to continue to show up in the specific ways that the specific life requires. He showed up for 41 years, for the patients in Pennsylvania, for the late evening calls and the house calls and the specific follow-up on the specific patient. He showed up because showing up was a specific form available to him of the specific ongoing response to the specific question. What more can I do? Not for Thomas, for the ones who are still here, for the ones who can still be helped, for the specific patients in the specific town in Pennsylvania who needed the specific physician who was present and attentive and available. That is what the journal and the medicine together represent. The question in the journal and the answer in the medicine, the specific ongoing work of asking what more can be done and then doing it every day for 41 years in the specific conditions of the specific life. He saved 200 men. He could not save Thomas. He spent 53 years asking what more he could have done. He practiced medicine for 41 years, answering the question in the only form available. Thomas is in the journal, and the journal is in the daughter's keeping, and the story is being told. That is the full accounting of the medic who saved 200 men and couldn't save the one that mattered, and who spent the rest of his life showing up anyway. The specific experience of the combat medic, the specific psychological position of the person whose role is to keep others from dying, in conditions where keeping others from dying is often not possible, is one of the most psychologically complex roles in combat. And the research literature on combat medics documents this complexity with a specificity that the general accounts of combat trauma do not always capture. The medic is in combat, but is not primarily a combatant. The medic's weapon is the medical kit, and the medic's mission is the preservation of life in conditions designed to destroy it. The specific psychological tension of this position, being in the killing environment and the role of the person trying to prevent the killing from being permanent, produces a specific form of the combat experience that is different from both the infantryman's experience and the non-combatant experience. The medic sees what the infantryman sees. He is in the same places, under the same fire, in the same conditions. But the medic is also the person who arrives after the shooting, who comes to the specific person who has been hit, who assesses the specific damage, who makes the specific decisions about what can be done and what cannot. The medic is the person who witnesses the specific medical reality of what the weapons do to the specific bodies they are designed to damage, and who does this witnessing in the specific intimacy of the hands-on assessment and the hands-on treatment. This specific intimacy, the specific knowledge of what the wound is and what the wound is doing to the specific person, is a specific knowledge that the combat medic carries home alongside the specific grief of the specific failures. The medic knows the specific body in a way that the infantry soldier does not know the bodies around him. The medic has touched the specific wound and assessed the specific damage and made the specific attempt to address it. The specific physical intimacy of the medic's work with the specific bodies of the specific men he treats is a specific form of the knowledge that is not easily shared with people who have not been in the position. He had been in the position for 2 years and 3 months. He had touched hundreds of wounds. He had assessed the specific damage of the weapons of the Italian campaign, the specific character of the shrapnel, the specific patterns of the rifle wounds, the specific damage of the artillery, and he brought the specific knowledge of what those weapons did to the specific bodies of the specific men to the specific medical decisions he made in the field. The specific knowledge was useful. It was part of what made him effective. The specific clinical understanding of what he was seeing and what it required and what was possible. It was also part of what he carried home in the specific form of the specific knowledge of what bullets do to the specific bodies of the specific people. He did not speak about this in detail to his patients in Pennsylvania. He spoke to them about their conditions in the specific language of the clinical relationship that the specific requirements of the physician's role define. But the specific knowledge that was behind his attention to their conditions The specific understanding of what damage to a body cost the person who inhabits it, learned in the specific conditions of the Italian campaign, was part of what made him physician he was. The specific other medics I want to tell you about are the medics whose stories I have encountered in the research that represent the range of the experience, the different specific ways that the specific position of the combat medic shapes the specific people who occupy it. There was a medic from the Pacific who came home and became a nurse, not a physician, because the specific path to the medical degree was not available to him in the specific circumstances of his return, but the specific work of the nurse, which was the closest civilian equivalent to the specific work he had done in the field. He worked in emergency medicine for 30 years. He described the specific quality of his work as a specific attempt to remain in the specific role, to stay in the position of the person who is present when the body is in crisis, because the specific position was the only position in which his specific skills and his specific experience could be fully used. He was good at the work. He was also, by his own account, managing something specific in the specific work. The specific ongoing attempt to do the specific thing he had been unable to do in the specific cases where it had mattered most. He had lost men in the Pacific. He was not losing men in the emergency room, not if he could help it. And the specific intensity of the not if he could help was a specific form of the specific grief that the specific work provided an outlet for. He retired at 62, earlier than he had intended, because the specific intensity of the emergency room, the specific ongoing weight of the specific responsibility, had become more than the specific resources of a specific age could manage. He described the retirement as a specific experience of stepping out of the role that had defined his professional life and discovering that he did not know what to do with the specific space that the role had been filling. He found things to do with the space. He had children and grandchildren and a specific community that needed specific things that he was able to provide. He did not go back to the emergency room. He visited, occasionally, as a volunteer, the specific continuing presence of the person who could not fully leave the role. He died in 2003. His obituary described a nurse of exceptional dedication and skill. His family described a man who was always present when someone needed him, and who had been that way since before any of them were born. The specific medic from the European theater, the one whose story forms the center of this episode, never spoke about Thomas directly to his family. They knew, in the general way that the families of veterans know, that the war had left specific marks, that something specific had happened. They did not know the name. They did not know the date. They did not know the specific weight of the specific question that the specific journal had been carrying for 53 years. They knew the quality. They experienced it in the specific care and the specific attention and the specific availability that the specific quality produced. They received the specific gift of a father who paid attention in the specific way that the specific grief had made necessary, who was present with specific fullness that the people who had not been through what he had been through might not have been able to sustain. The two registers of his experience, the professional knowledge that nothing more could have been done, and the personal grief that he had failed the person who mattered most, existed in the same life for 53 years without resolving into each other. He held both. He practiced medicine. He asked the question. He answered the question. He asked it again. This is a specific form of the unresolvable grief, the specific ongoing work of living with a thing that cannot be fixed, that cannot be undone, that can only be carried in the specific form available. He carried it in the specific form of the journal and the specific form of the medicine and the specific form of the quality of attention that both of these things produced. Thomas was 22 years old. He died outside Casino in January 1944. The medic was holding him when he died. The medic saved 200 other men. He spent 53 years asking if he could have saved one more. The answer was no. He asked anyway. That is a specific form of the specific love, the specific refusal to accept the no as the end of the question, even when the no is correct, even when professional knowledge confirms a no, even when the 53 years of the analysis arrive at the same place. He loved Thomas in the specific way that soldiers love each other in the specific conditions of the Italian campaign in the winter of 1943 to 44. He cannot save Thomas. He carried the not saving for 53 years in the specific form of the question and the specific form of the medicine. The 53 years in the medicine and the question are the specific forms that the specific love took after the specific death. That is a medic who saved 200 men. That is the one he couldn't save. That is what it costs to be the person whose job is to keep others from dying, in conditions where keeping others from dying is sometimes not possible. That is the full accounting. So far, the rest of it requires the specific stories I want to tell you now. The specific psychological phenomenon of survivor guilt, the specific experience of a person who has survived something that others did not, and who carries a specific irrational but powerful sense that the survival was in some way a failure of the obligation to the people who did not survive, has been documented extensively in the literature on combat trauma. It is not unique to medics. It is one of the most common psychological responses to the specific experience of surviving a catastrophe in which others died, and it was present in veterans of the Second World War in proportions that the period's medicine was not equipped to address. In medics, the specific form of the survivor guilt had a specific additional dimension. The medic's role was not simply to survive. His role was to keep others from dying. The specific failure of the medic was therefore not simply the failure to survive. It was a failure to do the job. The specific person the medic could not save was not simply a fellow survivor who died. He was the person the medic was there to save. The specific professional failure and the specific personal grief were the same thing. He had been a medical student before the war, had been in his second year at a medical school in Pennsylvania when Pearl Harbor happened, and he had enlisted. He had completed his combat medic training and had gone to the Army Medical Corps with the specific skills and the specific commitment of a young man who had already decided that medicine was what he was going to do with his life. He was good at the work. The specific competence that the 200 represent is a real competence. A man who was good at what he did in conditions of extreme difficulty over a sustained period. He finished medical school after the war. He became a general practitioner in a small town in Pennsylvania, and he practiced medicine there for 41 years. He was, by all accounts that survive him, his patients, his colleagues, his family, an exceptional physician. He paid attention to his patients in the specific way of a man for whom the attention was not a professional courtesy, but a moral obligation. He was available. He remembered. He showed up. His daughter, who is now in her 70s and who told me this story, describes a father who was always available to his patients in ways that went beyond what the professional requirements asked for. The late evening calls answered. The house calls made. The specific follow-up on the specific patient whose case was bothering him days after the appointment, because something in the clinical picture had not resolved in his mind, and he needed to know how it had resolved in the patient. She attributes this specific quality of availability, the specific quality of the attention, and the follow-up and the presence to Thomas. She does not know this. She is careful to say. She did not know about Thomas until after her father died, when she found a specific journal he had kept for 53 years, from January 1944 to his death in 1997. The journal was not a diary of the ordinary sort. It was not a daily record of events. It was a specific record of the specific question that the specific failure had produced and that he had been working on for 53 years. The question was, what more could I have done? He had been asking it since January 1944. Not every day. The journal was not a daily document. It was a periodic document, written when the question pressed itself forward in a specific form that required the writing. The entries are technical in their character. The specific medical analysis of the specific wound, the specific assessment of the specific tools available, the specific review of the specific decisions made in the 45 seconds between the shot and the hands on the wound, and the 3 minutes on the hands on the wound, to the knowledge that it was not going to be enough. He was a physician. He brought the question the specific tools of the physician, the specific medical knowledge, the specific clinical analysis, the specific professional assessment of the gap between what was done and what could have been done. The journal entries evolve over the 53 years. As the medical knowledge evolves, as the specific advances in trauma medicine and emergency care and the specific developments in the field that he practiced and gave him new tools for the analysis of the specific question. The answer, across 53 years of the analysis, did not change. In January 1944, outside Casino, in the middle of a patrol that had gone wrong, with the specific tools available, a 45-second response time, and the specific character of the specific wound, nothing more could have been done. The professional assessment, applied with the tools available at each point in the 53 years, produced the same conclusion. The outcome was determined by the character of the wound, the tools available, and the time between the shot and the hands. He knew this. He had known it, in some part of himself, since the first analysis, in the weeks after Thomas died. The professional knowledge told him that nothing more could have been done. The professional knowledge was not sufficient to address the specific grief of the specific person who had been holding the specific man when the specific man died. This is a specific character of the medic's grief. The specific way that the professional knowledge and the personal grief exist in the same person and do not address each other. He knew, professionally, that nothing more could have been done. He felt personally that he had failed the person who mattered most. Both things were true in their respective registers, and the 53 years of the journal were the specific ongoing attempt to make the two registers speak to each other, to find the specific analysis that would produce the specific reconciliation. The reconciliation did not come. The journal ends in 1997, the year of his death, with the same question and the same answer and the same specific grief. He had asked the question for 53 years. The answer had not changed. The grief had not been resolved by the answer. What had changed was everything else. The 200 men who were alive and had built their lives and had grown old. Some of them had come back to thank him. Not all, not most, but enough that over the years he had accumulated specific encounters with specific people who were alive because of the specific thing he had done in the specific moment. These encounters were real and they mattered. He received them with the specific gratitude of a man who needed the evidence that the work had counted. They did not relieve the grief of the one. They existed alongside it, in the specific way that the two registers of his experience, the professional and the personal, the 200 and the one, existed in the same life without fully speaking to each other. His patients in Pennsylvania did not know about Thomas. They knew their doctor in the specific way of patients who trust a physician, through the specific evidence of the care, the attention, the availability, the follow-up. They did not know that the care and the attention and the availability were, in part, the specific form that the specific grief had taken in the specific life. They did not know that the late evening call answered and the house call made and the specific follow-up on the specific patient were, in some dimension, the specific ongoing response to the specific question that the journal had been asking since January 1944. She found the journal after his death. In the specific place, he kept things that were private, not hidden but not displayed, kept in the specific place of the things that were his and that he had not invited others to share. She read it over 3 days. She wept, not simply from grief at her father's death, which was its own specific grief, from the specific overwhelming experience of understanding, for the first time, the specific source of the specific quality that she had experienced in her father throughout her life, the attention, the availability, the specific follow-up on the patient whose case was bothering him, and of understanding what it had cost him to maintain that quality for 41 years. He had been answering the question for 53 years. The question had never been answered. He had practiced medicine with the specific quality of a man who was answering it anyway, who was doing every day the specific work that the question required, regardless of the specific fact that the question did not resolve. This is the specific form of the medic's life after the war, not the resolution, not the absolution. The ongoing work carried out in the specific shadow of the specific grief for 41 years in a specific town in Pennsylvania with the specific patients who did not know and who received the specific quality of the care that the grief had produced. He saved 200 men. He could not save Thomas. He spent 53 years asking what more he could have done. The answer did not change. He practiced medicine for 41 years anyway. Thomas was 22 years old. He died at 3:27 on a Tuesday afternoon in January 1944. He is not forgotten. He is in the journal, and the journal is in the daughter's keeping and the story is being told. That is the full accounting. That is a medic who saved 200 men and couldn't save the one that mattered, and who spent 53 years making the two things live in the same life. The specific broader context of the combat medic's role in the Second World War and the specific ways in which that role shaped the people who occupied it is worth examining because it illuminates a specific gift that the position sometimes gave alongside the specific cost it always imposed. The combat medic was, in the specific conditions of the Second World War, one of the most immediately visible expressions of the human impulse to preserve life in conditions designed to destroy it. The medic ran toward the wounded when everyone else was running away from the fire. The medic made himself visible, the red cross on the helmet, the medical kit instead of the rifle. In an environment where visibility was a thing that got you killed, the medic was a specific person who had decided, before any specific engagement, that the preservation of the specific life of the specific wounded soldier was worth the specific risk that the decision required. This decision, which was a medic's decision by role, built into the specific job before any specific battle, was also, for many of the men who made it, a specific expression, the specific thing they believed about the value of human life. Not all medics were conscientious objectors. Not all of them had refused combat duty for moral reasons. Many of them had simply chosen the medical role because it fit their specific capabilities and their specific inclinations. But the specific decision embedded in the role to run toward the wounded in conditions designed to kill was a decision that expressed, in the most specific and most dangerous form available, the specific belief that the specific life of the specific person was worth the specific risk. The medic who ran toward Thomas in January 1944 was running toward the person who mattered most to him in the specific community of the specific company, in the specific conditions of the specific patrol, with the specific knowledge that the fire was ongoing and that his visibility was a specific risk. He ran anyway. He arrived in 45 seconds. It was not enough, but the running was real. The 45 seconds were real. The hands on the wound, and the 3 minutes and the holding at the end were real. The specific act of the medic, the specific decision to run toward the specific person in the specific conditions, was a specific act of the specific love that the specific role allowed, and the specific grief that followed it was a specific cost of the specific love. He paid the cost for 53 years. He practiced medicine for 41. He asked a question in the journal. He answered it in the medicine. He held both registers in the same life, without letting either one crowd out the other. The 200 who were alive. Thomas was gone. The medic was in Pennsylvania. The patients were seen. The question was asked. The life continued. This is a specific form of the specific heroism that the specific role produced. Not the dramatic heroism of the single act, though the single act was real, but the sustained heroism of the specific ongoing work of showing up in the specific shadow of the specific grief. The 53 years of the question and the 41 years of the medicine are the specific form of this specific heroism. He was not celebrated for it. He was not given a medal for the specific quality of the attention he brought to the patients in Pennsylvania. He was not publicly honored for the specific ongoing work of answering the question in the specific form of the medicine. He practiced medicine in a small town in Pennsylvania for 41 years, and his patients trusted him because he was a specific person who paid the specific attention, and that was enough. It was enough because the people who received the attention received what they needed. The specific patients who called at 9 in the evening and had the call answered. The specific patients whose cases were bothering him 3 days after the appointment. They received the specific quality of the care that the specific grief had produced without knowing that the grief was part of what they were receiving. The medic's gift to his patients was not the grief. The grief was his. The gift was a quality that the grief had made necessary. The specific ongoing attention, the specific refusal to let the patient become an abstraction, the specific insistence on knowing the specific person with the specific condition, and following up until a specific resolution was understood. Thomas was 22 years old. He died at 3:27 on a Tuesday afternoon in January 1944. He is in the journal, and the journal is in the daughter's keeping. The medic saved 200 men. He couldn't save Thomas. He practiced medicine for 41 years. He asked a question for 53. Subscribe and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. That is the full accounting. The specific men who came back to find the medic, the ones who had been in the 200 and who had tracked him down to tell him what his presence had meant, represent the specific human connection between the medic's work and its consequences. And the stories of those encounters are among the most moving in the research I have done for this series. There was a man who found the medic at a veterans reunion in 1967, 23 years after the medic had treated him on a hillside in Italy. He had been hit in the leg. a wound that the medic had treated in the specific field conditions of the Italian campaign, controlling the bleeding and stabilizing the injury enough to allow the evacuation that preserved the leg and preserved the life. The man had walked on the leg for 23 years since. He came to the reunion specifically to find the medic. He had kept the specific memory of the specific face and the specific hands working on his leg, and he had made inquiries through the veterans' organizations until he had found the specific person. He found him at the reunion. He introduced himself. He said, "You saved my leg in Italy in 1944. The medic received this with the specific expression that his daughter, who told me this story, described as the most complicated expression she had ever seen on a face. The specific combination of the real gratitude for specific evidence that the work had counted and the specific private awareness of the specific question that the work had not been able to answer." He said, "I'm glad you're walking." The man said, "I have 3 children and 4 grandchildren, and I would not have had any of them if you hadn't been on that hillside." The medic received this. He shook the man's hand. He said, "That's enough." The specific quality of the "that's enough," the specific phrase that he chose for the specific moment, is a specific image that has stayed with me from everything I have learned about the medic. He had been practicing medicine for 23 years by 1967. He had been asking the question in the journal for 23 years. He had been providing the specific care that the specific answer, nothing more could have been done, had not resolved the specific grief enough to stop requiring. And into the middle of this, into the specific 23 years of the question, and the medicine, and the quality and the grief, the man who had walked for 23 years on a leg walked up to him and said, "3 children and 4 grandchildren. That's enough." Not enough to close the question. The journal continued after 1967. The question did not stop, but enough, specifically enough, in the specific moment, for the specific person who was holding the specific weight of the specific failure, enough to make the specific work real in the specific way that the professional accountant alone does not make it real. The 200 were real. The 3 children and the 4 grandchildren were real. The man walking on the leg he would not have had was real. Thomas was real too. Thomas was 22 years old and died at 3:27 on a Tuesday in January 1944, and was real in the specific way of the person who is gone and who does not become less real for being gone. The medic knew this. The journal records this. The 53 years of the question acknowledge this. Both things are true. The man on the leg is real and Thomas is real, and the medic held both in the same life for 53 years and practiced medicine in between them. The journal and the letters are in the daughter's keeping. The journal has a question and the analysis. The letters have a man on the leg, and the 3 children, and the 4 grandchildren, and the "that's enough." She keeps them together because they are both parts of the same accounting. The specific lesson I want to leave you with is this: the "that's enough" and the question are not opposites. They are the same thing from different angles. The specific ongoing attempt to make the specific life worth the specific weight it carries, and the specific ongoing evidence that the attempt has produced something real. He asked the question for 53 years. He practiced medicine for 41. He saved 200 men. He couldn't save Thomas. He received the man on the leg, and the 3 children, and the 4 grandchildren, and he said that's enough and meant it, and continued asking the question. Both things at once, for 53 years. That is a specific form of the specific life of the specific medic. That is the full accounting. Thomas is in the journal. The man on the leg walked for 23 years before finding the medic to tell him. The daughter keeps the journal and the letters in the same place. The story is being told. Subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it. The medic who saved the men he can save and asks forever about the one he couldn't deserves to be known. Not for the 200 alone, and not for the 1 alone, but for the specific way he held both for 53 years, and showed up anyway. That is the full accounting. That is the medic who saved 200 men, and couldn't save the one that mattered. The specific question of what we owe the dead who we could not save, the specific question that the medic was asking in the journal for 53 years, is one that extends beyond the specific context of the combat medic to the general human experience of loss, and the specific human capacity for the kind of grief that does not resolve. Not all grief resolves. The specific clinical understanding of grief, the stages, the timeline, the expected arc toward acceptance and integration, describes a process that many people experience in its general outlines, but that many other people experience only partially. The grief that does not resolve is not always pathological. Sometimes it is a specific, appropriate response to the specific character of the specific loss. The loss of a person you loved in conditions where the loss was your professional responsibility, where the person was in your care and died while in your care, is a specific form of loss that the general understanding of grief does not fully capture. It contains the grief of the loss and the grief of professional failure, and the specific ongoing question of whether the professional failure was in fact a failure or simply the specific outcome that the specific conditions produced. The question does not always have a clean answer. The medic's journal demonstrates that the question can remain genuinely open for 53 years, even in the presence of a correct professional assessment. He knew the answer. Nothing more could have been done. He kept asking the question. Both of these things were true for 53 years. The specific form of his response to the unresolvable question, the specific medicine, the specific attention, the specific quality of the presence, is what I want to focus on, because I think it is the most instructive element of his story for people who are not combat medics and who are not carrying the specific grief of the specific failure in a specific war. What he did with the unresolvable question was, he used it. He did not dissolve it. He did not suppress it. He did not resolve it. He used it. He translated the specific ongoing energy of the specific unresolvable question into the specific form of the specific medicine that the specific patients in the specific town in Pennsylvania required. He answered the question in the only form available, the ongoing work, the ongoing attention, the ongoing presence. And he did this for 41 years. The translation of the unresolvable grief into the specific work is a specific form of the human capacity for meaning-making that the research on post-traumatic growth documents in its various forms. The medic did not resolve the grief. He made the grief productive in the specific form available to him. He made Thomas's death, the specific death that was a specific failure, into the specific source of the specific quality of the medicine that the specific patients received. This is not a lesson that the grief was worth having. The grief was not worth having. Thomas was worth having, and the grief is the specific price of losing him. But the grief, once present, can be made productive. It can be translated. It can be used, not to replace what was lost, but to produce something in the specific life that goes on. He used it for 41 years. His patients received the specific thing it produced without knowing its specific source. He asked the question in the journal, without telling the patients what the question was. He held both registers, the private and professional, in the same life for 53 years, and practiced medicine in between them. There was one more visit. In 1991, 57 years after Thomas died, a man came to his office in Pennsylvania. He was an old man by then, in his late 70s, and he had come from Georgia, from the town where Thomas had grown up, where Thomas's family still lived. He was Thomas's older brother. He had found a medic through the specific network of the veterans' organizations, through the specific research that a man with a specific question sometimes does in the specific late years of his life, when the specific question has been waiting for 50 years and is not going to wait anymore. He said, "I understand you were with my brother when he died." The medic said, "Yes." Thomas's brother said, "I've been wondering for 50 years if he was afraid." The medic thought about this for a moment. He thought about the specific afternoon, the specific 45 seconds, the specific 3 minutes. He thought about what he had witnessed in those 3 minutes. The specific quality of Thomas at the end of the specific afternoon on the specific hillside outside Casino in January 1944. He said, no, he was not afraid. He was in pain. And then he was not in pain. He was not afraid. Thomas's brother received this. He sat with it for a moment. Then he said, "Thank you. That's what I needed to know." He drove back to Georgia. The medic went back to his patients. He wrote about the visit in the journal. He wrote, "Thomas's brother came today. He asked if Thomas was afraid. I told him no. I think that's true. I think that's true." The specific entry, the specific careful uncertainty of the "I think that's true" repeated, is a specific image I carry from the medic's journal, not the professional certainty of the clinical assessment. The specific human care of a man who wanted to give the brother the answer the brother needed and who was not certain, after 53 years of the question, that the specific answer he gave was the specific truth, and who acknowledged the uncertainty in the specific privacy of the journal. He gave Thomas's brother what he needed. He noted the uncertainty in the journal. He continued to ask the question. That is the medic who saved 200 men. That is Thomas, who was 22 years old. That is Thomas's brother, who drove from Georgia to ask if his brother was afraid. That is the medic, who said no and meant it and hoped it was true. That is the full accounting. The specific community of men who came back to find the medic. The specific individuals from the 200 who had tracked him through the veterans organizations and the unit reunions, and the specific networks of people who were looking for the specific person who had made the specific difference, were not all like the man on the leg. They were various. They brought various things to the specific encounter. Some of them brought the specific gratitude that the man on the leg brought, the specific accounting of the life that had continued because the medic had been there, the children and grandchildren and years of ordinary life that the specific intervention had made possible. Some of them brought something different, not gratitude exactly, but the specific need to acknowledge, to make the specific acknowledgement that the specific thing had happened and that the specific person had been part of it. Some of them brought something closer to the need to tell the specific person who had been there that the being there had been witnessed, that the being there had been real, that the being there had mattered in ways that the chaos of battle and the specific conditions of the Italian campaign had not allowed them to say in the moment. He received all of these visits with the specific quality of attention that he brought to everything. He listened. He remembered the specific engagement, the specific conditions, the specific person. Most of them he could place specifically, from the specific memory of the specific wounds and the specific terrain and the specific conditions. Some of them he could not place. He told those men honestly that he did not remember the specific encounter, but that he was glad they were there. The honesty was itself part of the quality. He was not going to manufacture a specific memory for the sake of the specific comfort of man who had come to tell him something. He was going to tell the truth about what he remembered and receive what the man brought and honor both. He died in 1997. His daughter found the journal the following year, clearing the study. She has read it multiple times since. She says each reading is different. Each time she comes to it with a specific understanding of a specific person she has accumulated in the years since his death, and each time the journal shows her something she had not seen in the previous reading. The 53 years of the question are the 53 years of the person. The specific entries, the specific technical analysis, the specific clinical review, the specific return to the same ground at the same question, are the specific ongoing presence of the specific mind in the specific grief. She reads a journal, and she reads her father. The journal is a specific form in which she can continue to know him, after the knowing of the living presence is no longer possible. This is a specific echo of the second episode in this series. The sons and daughters who grew up without fathers and who found them in the letters. The medic's daughter had her father for the years of his life. She found another layer of him in the journal after his death. The specific private person behind the specific public physician. The specific ongoing grief behind the specific ongoing quality of the care. She says she is grateful for the journal, not for the grief in it. She would rather the grief had not been necessary, but for the specific person the grief reveals, the specific ongoing honesty of the question, the specific ongoing care of the analysis, the specific ongoing work of holding the thing that cannot be resolved and practicing medicine in between it. He asked the question for 53 years. He practiced medicine for 41. He received Thomas's brother and said no, he was not afraid, and he hoped it was true. He died in 1997. The journal and the letters are in the daughter's keeping. The man on the leg has been dead for many years. Thomas has been dead since 1944. Thomas's brother has been dead since 2003. The medic is gone. The question is in the journal. The journal is in the daughter's keeping. Thomas deserved to be named. He was 22 years old. He died outside casino. He was not afraid. There is one final thing I want to say about Thomas, about the specific 22-year-old man from Georgia who died outside casino on a Tuesday afternoon in January 1944, and who had been present in this episode as the specific weight the medic carried. Thomas was not simply the weight. Thomas was a person. He had a family in Georgia and a life before the war, and specific qualities that the medic knew from 2 years of the specific proximity of the Italian campaign. He was funny. The medic noted in the journal in the first entry, written in January 1944, a week after his death. He was funny in the specific dry way of someone who had grown up in rural Georgia and who had the specific comic sensibility of a man who had seen enough of the world to find it genuinely absurd. He played cards badly and knew it. He wrote letters home every week without fail. Letters to his mother, to his brother, to a girl in Georgia whose name the medic did not know. He was 22 years old. He was in the Army because his country was at war, and he was of age, and he had specific obligations, and he met them. He was on the patrol that went wrong in January 1944 because he was in the company that was assigned to patrol, and he was in the company because he was in the Army, and he was in the Army because the war